Today we'll be discussing one of the most contentious issues in negotiations over the fiscal year 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the right to repair. I'm your host, Jerry McGinn, and welcome back to another episode of All About the Base. So what exactly is the right to repair? The idea is actually relatively simple. When the Department of Defense or Department of War purchases equipment or a weapon system, the government and the original equipment manufacturer, or OEM, negotiate technical data rights in the contract to repair and maintain that system. In many cases, the vendor or the OEM often controls access to the technical data required to repair an item in operational use. Some argue that if the military or the government doesn't have the right to repair its own equipment, the DoD is dependent on the contractor timelines and pricing, which can make repair work more expensive and less efficient. This in turn can impact operational readiness if aircraft are grounded for maintenance or vehicles are stuck in repair bays. Two leading voices on this side of the issue are Senator Elizabeth Warren and Army Secretary Dan Driscoll. Take a listen.
The Air Force's budget request was about $220 billion last year, and many of those billions going to develop weapon systems. But even then, contractors try to withhold technical data rights, preventing service members from repairing equipment that the Air Force itself owns.
As that manifests for the Army, we would have our couple $100,000 Humvees go down. We could 3D print a part for that, or a Black Hawk, and we were unable to do that.
Yep.
Correct.
Got it.
And so what we are now saying is, we the Army have just internally said, hey, we will not sign a contract that doesn't give us that right.
Senator Warren and Secretary Driscoll both point to the high cost and inefficiency associated with OEMs maintaining sole access to their IP rights. However, there's another side of this issue. The National Defense Industries Association, or NDIA, published a white paper that argued that any mandate forcing manufacturers to transfer parts, tools, and information to the government, which can then be shared with third parties, can reduce DoD's access to innovation and may disincentivize the private sector from doing business with the government in the first place. The controversy led to competing language in the National Defense Authorization Act in the House and the Senate versions. In the House language, it stated that contractors must provide the DoD with fair and reasonable access to all repair materials, including parts, tools, and information used to diagnose, analyze, maintain, or repair the good or service. The House version also included a data as a service provision, which allows the government to pay for just the technical data and software it used. The Senate, meanwhile, proposed a new concept based on Federal Aviation or FAA practices, which called instructions for continued operational readiness to enable the right to repair. In the end, Congress effectively punted on the issue. But the right to repair is not going away. Now I'd like to turn and bring in my colleague, Dr. Alexis LaSalle-Ross, who's president of Apex Defense Strategies and CSIS Senior Associate Non-Resident. She is a longtime expert on this issue and will help us unlock intellectual property and the right to repair issue, discuss the pros and cons of both sides, and help illuminate where do we go from here. So Alexis, you've worked these issues on Capitol Hill and in the Pentagon and now in industry. So can you tell us, what is IP and why is it really so important?
First, thanks for having me on the show, Jerry. Always a pleasure. Yes, I worked the IP for quite a long time, and there are two things that have definitely become very noticeable to me. First, all these stakeholder groups, industry, DoD, Department of War, Congress, they all have their positions are all sort of deceptively complicated. Depending on what function you perform in these places or what you offer into the ecosystem, you have a different opinion. Hardware, software, third-party maintenance, and inside the department, acquisition, logistics, budget, legal, everybody's got an opinion. The second thing is that no matter which stakeholder group you're in, industry, Congress, DOD, they have always gone to the mat over IP. It's one of the most controversial acquisition topics I've ever worked on. All right, so let's get into it. What is IP? As you asked, what's IP? Who owns it? This is really broader than just defense. This really relates to commerce. And so intellectual property is any product of the human intellect that the law protects against unauthorized use by others. So it really gets to ownership, right? At the heart of it, it's ownership. Who developed it or created it? And that is the person who has the ownership of it. Really, owning versus licensing is kind of the key here, because that owner can either sell, license, or retain it for future revenue. And when you do get access to IP, the license agreement usually describes things like use and the who you can provide it to, the how long you'll have it for, and the functions you can do with it. So rights allocation. Where are the rights afforded to whom, right? So in the US, this traditionally is based on who paid for what. You get what you pay for. So those who have invested their private capital to provide something or to develop something retains quite a lot of the rights. And in the national security space, we also have some rights afforded based on the type of data or what you use it for. So, training troops to use something, maintenance, operating it, those have more broad rights because it's relatively less detailed information. But the detailed manufacturing and process data, that depends on who paid for it. So if it is an entity where they developed it exclusively at private expense, and it's their private capital that developed it, then the department really only has limited rights to it. If the government financed it, then the government has unlimited rights to it. But if they developed it together at mixed funding, then they have to negotiate. So it's complicated.
Very complicated. But it's really interesting where you see Secretary Driscoll and Senator Warren on the same side of an issue. But it really seems all about balance. And we have a clip from House Armed Services Committee Chairman Rogers that talks about the importance of balancing intellectual property and operational use. So let's go to that.
Meanwhile, excessive regulations and fears of losing privately funded IP are driving away commercial firms and startups and making VCs think twice about investing in defense tech.
So it seems like there are pros and cons on both sides of these issues. So let's dig into that a little bit. So why does the government need access to IP?
Sure. All right, so when you look at it from the government's perspective, they are going to have this military equipment for several decades, a surprisingly long time. And they're also operating in distant, austere, very hostile environments. So they really can't afford to, they feel as though, especially now, that they can't be overly dependent on a third party or a contractor to provide immediate support. So it really is rooted in readiness. Now, I'm sure you're going to ask what industry's perspective.
Well, I mean, on the flip side, how does industry what is their stake in this?
Absolutely. Industry has a viewpoint on this as well. And it really, there are many different types of industry, as I mentioned in the beginning, but I think universally, the concept of intellectual property and the investment and the innovation that is created from, or the investment that is used to create the IP and the innovation that it comes from is paramount for all firms in the private sector, right? So whether you are a traditional firm that has traditional defense prime, or you are a new entrant that has been backed by a private capital, venture capital, or PE firms, either way, or if you are producing hardware or software or something in between, a combination and mix. In either case, it's really for them, it's rooted in the investment. So the investment and that investment's future revenue. So whether you are an investor or a shareholder, you might be asking right now, if a company that I've invested in or that I own stock in is forced to give up its IP, the IP's value would then diminish, and the return on that value for future investment, the return on my investment, the future revenue, would decline as well.
I see. So, the stakes are big for government and for industry in this issue.
Absolutely.
So, and how did it come out exactly in the NDA? Let's turn to that. So, as I said, sort of Congress punted in the joint explanatory statement that accompanied the NDA. They said, we assess department challenges related to technical data are not rooted in an insufficiency in the law, but rather insufficiencies in the department's planning and resourcing decisions made early in the acquisition phase related to statement of systems it procures. So can you unpack this a little for us, Alexis?
Sure. So essentially there is so much in any kind of business arrangement comes down to negotiation and contracts. This is no different. And really what the conference here is saying, the conference managers are saying, is that there is in statute the opportunity to negotiate, and they're encouraging them to use specially negotiated licenses. The issue has been that the department historically has struggled to negotiate at the right time and in the right manner and provide the right amount of resourcing in a variety of areas in order to actually get what they need and take delivery of it in the appropriate way.
Gotcha. So where do we go from here?
Very good question. So I think that there's both new approaches and also some steps that the department can take immediately that can be quite beneficial. So first of all, new approaches, a new novel concept for how do you manage IP and approach it fundamentally to include investment in balancing the interests of all parties is data as a service, sometimes called IP as a service. The concept here is sort of changes and flips on its head what we typically do. So right now, we contract for the deliverable, the delivery of intellectual property. But the problem with that is that it's static. It comes, you've got to maintain it, you got to keep it up to date. Very expensive to do that. So alternatively, IP as a service is something that people have been talking about for the last couple of years. This is a situation in which the OEMs and the department would create a framework where they would have all the necessary IP and software needed for manufacture and repair accessible to the department, but the department only has to pay for it if and when it uses it for that manufacture or repair of something.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and DOD actually talked about this. Secretary Hegseth talked about this in his speech last month, when he talked about his acquisition transformation strategy. And there's actually a section in there in the department strategy. I'm going to quote from it. It says, "The department will strike a balance between strengthening existing authorities and preserving the intellectual capital of industry, while ensuring the department has the information and tools it needs to conduct maintenance, repair, and overhaul of critical systems." So they're looking for that balance that we've been talking about, even Chairman Rogers raised. Right.
Balance is important, especially since one of the things we have to keep in mind is that there is that all of the interest here in IP and changing some of the way that they're approaching IP, we also want to make sure that it complements some of the other current and critically important goals of the department, like broadening the industrial base and working with more commercial vendors and buying more things commercially instead of developing military unique items. So it's good progress is being made. So now here's a few steps that we can make immediately to kick things off. Because remember, if they, as the Secretary Driscoll has argued, do a lot of contract renegotiations and try to get more access to more information, they're going to have a lot of it at their disposal. So how do you leverage it well? Well, first, plan early, negotiate really well, ideally when you still have competitive advantage and you haven't down selected yet. They're also going to need to allocate funds. We're going to have to find some money in the budget to license it, not just initially, but also to keep that IP up to date and to increase our capacity and our capabilities in our organic industrial base should we determine to do more repair and manufacturing in-house. And to include workforce as well, because we have a lot of people that we lack some of the skills to keep the IP update or to do some of this manufacturing and repair work. Also, we're going to need to rely on some more digital infrastructure, so some tools and skills that we need for this. This is not hard. Commercial best practice is an integrated digital environment, and where you can basically take receipt of the IP from the OEM, provide it to the PM in the department, provide it over to the units in the field for their repair work or printing if they choose to do that, and then also back at the depot so that they can manufacture or repair things as needed. So it's achievable. It's achievable. We just have to make the investments, and we have to be deliberate about how we do it.
Great. So it sounds like there's a lot of work for the administration to do. There's a lot of work for industry to do, and Congress is going to keep its eye very closely on this issue.
Right.
So I'd like to thank Alexis for joining us for this episode of All About the Base. It's been a great discussion. And remember, it's all about the base.